Very well. I'll take your letter. On one condition. Spare me the rest of his nonsense.
How dare you!
Keep silent. Right. Send him in.
Let's talk about Gothic.
Welcome to the colony.
What if I told you there was a game with a world that was designed specifically to thoroughly demoralize the player, just so they can appreciate it when they become the stalwart, big dick RPG hero archetype that everyone knows and loves? What if I also told you that that game was also a relatively obscure German RPG from 2001 that only Eastern Europeans and people with near autistic levels of game knowledge enjoy? Enter Gothic. When I said that this game was intentionally designed to be as inaccessible as possible, I wasn't lying. These developers were so dedicated to immersion that they even made launching the game a waking nightmare. That's why the Steam version is clearly superior, because the GOG version comes bundled with the latest patch and native HD support up to 1080p. The Steam version lets you immerse yourself in the world of Gothic before you even watch the first cutscene by forcing you to engage with the community in order to find and download the latest patch, in addition to the system pack that you have to set up for both the GOG and Steam versions so the game isn't a buggy mess. I of course refuse to download the system pack, because I love to see those NPC hips gyrating like Shakira every time dialogue is initiated. The game still barely chugs along without the system pack, but I would strongly encourage you to download it. If you want to play this game, which you should, just download it and drag and drop the files into your Gothic installation folder. You can find the system pack if you ask Google nicely. Once you launch the game, you're treated to the main menu. Like the true PC gaming thad that you are, you should know that the first thing you click should not be New Game, but Settings. Now is the best time to change the controls to the alternate setting, but leave the key bindings alone after doing this. Gothic is a game with a very strange control scheme that is meant to be left undisturbed, lest you end up tying your fingers up into little pretzels. Now, you can hit New Game. This is a game which will test the limits of your imagination. Lord knows what's going on in this cutscene. There's a grand total of 50 pixels on this screen. Luckily, the narrator has our back. It turns out there's a kingdom called Murtana that's been overrun with orcs, and the king really didn't know what to do for the war effort, so he made a bunch of criminals work for Ur to create the swords in an attempt to turn the tide against the troglodyte invasion. Sadly, it turns out that giving a bunch of convicted felons dangerous mining equipment wasn't exactly a big brain move, so he is forced to put up a magic barrier around the Valley of Mines to prevent the criminals from escaping. This of course is a great decision with no unintended consequences, except for the small detail of the stronger criminals killing all the guards and taking charge of the ore production in this newly established prison colony. Now, the king is forced to trade his own resources from the outside world for ore from the Valley of Mines. Before we get to the player character's role in this story, let me just slob the knob of every red-blooded German Ubermensch who designed this game. They decided to turn every established video game fantasy trope of the time completely upside down from the very first second that this flawed masterpiece begins. And I'm not even talking about the fact that this game rams its entire fist up your asshole and spreads its fingers as wide as possible inside of your large intestine from the moment you begin playing. No, I'm talking about the story itself. A normal game would have you embarking on an epic journey to fight the orcs, and this prison colony would maybe be a small part of the main quest or a standout side quest. Here, the prison is the centerpiece of the action, and the orcs are merely a smaller part of the overarching story. In fact, they're facing the same problem that the hero and the factions aligned with the hero are facing. They too are stuck in the prison colony and cannot get out. That's what this entire story is about, getting out of a small prison colony. There's no world-ending cataclysm on the horizon. It's just the fate of a fairly large group of convicted felons that hangs in the balance. This is where our unnamed player character comes in. He's thrown unceremoniously through the barrier and into the Valley of Mines, where he's then picked up by the guards and... yeah, this is the second game I've reviewed that includes a POV shot of the player getting punched in the face. I should make a top 5 list of these scenes or something. Honestly, this is one of my favorite protagonists in any video game. There's just so much about him to love, and everything positive about him reflects what many people, myself included, like to see in RPGs. He is by no means a silent protagonist, but he's not extremely emotional and retains a sense of neutrality in his lines. This is to make the player character connect with him even more while still giving him his own personality.
An infidel in the house of the master! Damned be you!
You be damned, you stinky moldy carpet!
He also has a completely unknown backstory. This is because you can imagine your own reason for him being thrown in the prison colony. Maybe he took the fall for his friend, who stole a loaf of bread to feed a starving family of children who were adopted from the mean streets of Corinus. Or maybe he was arrested after shoving a corn cob up the king's favorite German shepherd's rectal cavity. That's what I like about older games such as these. They really leave a lot up to the imagination. You'll notice that this game is very direct and realistic. Well, as realistic as a fantasy like this can be. This serves as a stark contrast to make the magic and supernatural elements in the story even more unbelievable when they get thrown in later on. If you're just thrown into a fantasy world that's filled to the brim with odd things, then nothing is odd. It's the complete opposite approach that Morrowind took. Even the user interface is completely different. The only thing you'll see is your health bar and your mana bar at the bottom of the screen. In fact, the game's map is a usable item that you have to buy from the old camp. And certain characters can draw on your map to paint a bigger picture of the colony as a whole. Or give you smaller maps that show you where a certain landmark is. This is much more immersive than having a map with just a bunch of markers on it that can easily be pulled up. Of course, not everything is gumdrops and handjobs, because soon you meet your very first enemy, the control scheme. This control scheme is very innovative, would be a kind way of saying it. You might find it janky in the beginning, but you do get used to it. In fact, you learn to adore it. Like a Steam title such as Peggle, The Elder Scrolls Blades, and Hentai Fantasy, you can easily play this game with one hand. This jank is emblematic of many titles from Central and Eastern Europe, which are affectionately referred to as Eurojank, because they're great games that have many mechanics and bugs that need to be modded out, and mechanics that take a lot of getting used to. Other examples of such Eurojank would be the Stalker series, Mountain Blade, it's a Turkish game, Metro 2033, and the first Witcher game. The controls work as follows. You use Q and E to turn, W and S to walk back and forth, and A and D to strafe. You also hit Control and forward to interact with items. You can draw your weapon or magic spells using the number keys or the space bar, and swing your weapon or cast the spell using the interact keys. You're also able to swing your weapon from side to side by holding Control and hitting the strafe keys or the turn keys. This combat is interesting because there's a certain rhythm to it, even though it mostly involves stun locking your enemy so they can't get a move in. It's like a much less fleshed out version of the combat in Onimusha Warlords for the PS2. You can also use your mouse to look around, but I usually just use it to adjust the camera up and down. Now that we've learned the controls, we can talk with the very first friend we meet, Diego. He's a real stand-up guy who looks out for his amigos. Every faction has their own Diego. The Swamp Camp has Lester and the New Camp has Gorn. In fact, everyone should strive to be the Diego in someone else's life. He gives the rundown of how the colony works and where you can find him in the Old Camp, which is one of 3 factions you can join in this game. These factions are the main driving force behind the first part of this story, which is all about the main characters surviving and fitting into the colony. This is the part of the game that most people praise the most, because without getting into spoilers, the rest of the game involves the hero's noble quest to destroy the barrier and let a bunch of escaped convicts loose on the countryside. The factions aren't necessarily good nor evil, but they are made up of people who can be seen as good or evil on an individual level. Each faction, which is called a camp in the game, has its own goal. The first one the player will come across is the Old Camp. This is the camp where the stronger convicts killed the guards and took their uniforms, and now provide some semblance of order in the colony. They are the ones who handle trading with the outside world, trading ore from the Old and New Camp's mines to the king in exchange for supplies and female convicts. Though there is some semblance of order, it's more like a protection racket than an actual government. You have to pay several guards 10 ore a day for proper and comprehensive protection. And even then, the guards won't do anything if both parties involved in the crime are paying protection money. That means you can go around beating people up for their lunch money if you are under the guards' protection in the district you're currently located in. In fact, you can beat up one of the boss of the Old Camp's head guards right in front of everyone and take his sword, which is one of the best swords in the game, and the people on the sidelines will cheer you on. Outside of the Old Camp to the northwest, you have the New Camp. They own the Free Mine and frequently trade with the Old Camp and protect the Water Mages, who send messengers to communicate with the Fire Mages, who are under the protection of the Old Camp. They work under a system that I'd call more militaristic and communist in nature. It's every man for himself, and they're a lot more lax about people beating each other up for money. Their main goal is to destroy the magic barrier by amassing tons of magical ore and blowing it up. But the only thing that would accomplish would be providing all the convicts with the sweet release of death. Like in the Old Camp, each member has its own worthy or unworthy set of attitudes and goals. You have cutthroat rogues, and you also have Boy Scouts like Gorn.
Hi, Greenhorn. As you can see, the colony is quite a small place. You can't help bumping into people all the time.
Finally, to the southwest, you have the Swamp Camp, or the Sect. They worship this old god called the Sleeper, who appears to them in their swampweed-induced hallucinations. They believe that the Sleeper is the one who will destroy the barrier and lead them to freedom. Of course, many of them just join for the free weed. However, those guys usually stay in the lower ranks and only harvest the swamp weed. Weed is their main source of income for the Swamp Camp. They roll it up into joints and send ambassadors to sell it to the other two camps. Like in real life, there are a lot of different strains of weed, and swamp weed does the same thing that real weed does. In fact, there's a quest where you can be a weed dealer for one of the ambassadors in the new camp, who is too drunk to sell off his supply. This is a more peaceful camp, and they're not huge fans of violence. I describe their society as a religious commune. The members vary from calm guru in search of enlightenment to power-hungry alchemist. You can do these favors for all of these camps, but you can only decide on joining one. Each one has its own set of perks, but overall the faction you choose really doesn't matter too much in the end. It's more of a way to introduce the player to the characters who will be present for the duration of the game. That's another thing I really appreciate about this game as well. The characters in this story aren't just a bunch of random people who pop in and out. You follow their threads and how they dovetail into other character arcs and the overarching plot of the game. Before you join a camp, however, the player character must figure out how to survive in the colony. You start out by getting killed by these low-level chicken things, and if you're careful, you can even find a rusty sword without getting mauled by a wandering pack of mole rats. You start out with only the clothes on your back. The player character can't even properly swing a sword, which is a great hindrance to progress, and is a natural way of locking you into the starting areas until you get better with a sword, which actually entails your character getting physically more proficient with swinging the sword. You also have to increase your strength and get ore for better equipment and food to recharge health. There are many ways to do these things. The traditional way is by doing quests, going out and killing beasts, and doing favors for other people. Or you can do things the much faster way by beating the shit out of people and taking their stuff. Or walking into their houses and taking from their chests. They only really get upset though if you walk into their house, not if you rummage through their stuff. You can steal from any chest in plain view. No one seems to care. This is especially useful in the blacksmith's area, where you can take a shit ton of raw steel, forge it, and buy items with crude swords for the entire first chapter of the game. Mugging people also gives experience when you knock them out. Just don't execute them, because the long dick of the law will be coming to split your supple German ass cheeks if you do. Though it's not completely fleshed out and has a lot of flaws, I really do appreciate that the developers chose to illustrate a struggle of morality through more mundane means instead of shoving a moral decision in your face. They also made the factions themselves morally gray, which is nice. The world isn't just some 5-year-old's idea of a medieval fantasy land where knights roam the world in search of peace and justice. It also doesn't hype the player character up as this avatar of virtue. He's neither inherently good nor evil. He simply is. This game isn't Ultima, it's Escape from New York. I'm like 99% sure I'm not the first one to make that comparison, but it's definitely the most appropriate comparison to make. Especially because everyone in this game sounds like they're from New Jersey or New York City. I'm not complaining about that aspect of the voice acting though. It reminds me of home.
I'd like to try working here as well.
But don't you think that you can make great blades?
In fact, I'd prefer those accents for a place that's supposed to be a crime-ridden hellhole, instead of those generic British voices they have in every other fantasy game. Of course, there are some interesting voice actors in this game as well.
Don't build your hut close to the ditch, they said. But none of these bastards told me what would happen if I still did it. When I came back from the mine a few days ago, I had a second door. Those pigs, I hate them. I can't tell you how much I hate them. Now everybody runs through my hut. Every idiot.
This game is definitely not without its bugs. I mentioned NPCs gyrating their hips during dialogue, but this is just the tip of the taint hair when it comes to strange and janky design. You see this box on the horizon? That's a forest. That's how this game renders distant forest and swamp textures. I'm not going to go over the rest of this story, because I really want more people to play this game. I will, however, say that the ending is satisfying. It segues right into Gothic 2, which in itself will merit an even longer video than this one. This is an excellent game with mechanics that take a lot of getting used to, but is generally a very rewarding experience with highly immersive qualities. Gothic 1 and 2 combine things that many would think were extremely simple mechanics to make a game world that is unparalleled in terms of immersion, even to this day. And guess what? A few developers in Spain are working on a remake for this flawed masterpiece, and I'll be doing a video about my thoughts on the remake shortly. If this remake for Gothic is successful, we might be seeing more games in this series in the future. Go out and play this series of games when you get the chance. You won't regret it, especially if you're a game developer. Thanks for watching. Creamy out.